Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where we break down commodities markets, sound money principles, and geopolitics, all with the goal of making you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is April 6, 2026, and I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Mark Thornton to the program, an Austrian economist, senior fellow at the Mises Institute, author, and the host of the Minor Issues podcast. Dr. Thornton sees the tailwinds driving both gold and silver as completely intact, and he is calling for new all-time highs for silver this year, driven by monetary debasement and the looming threat of hyperinflation for the US dollar, a factor he thinks could come into play faster than many realize. Mark unpacks his thoughts on government corruption, economic decay, and the death of free markets to make a case why gold and silver are the only lifeline in a world gone mad. All of this and so much more ahead in my conversation with Dr. Mark Thornton. Dr. Mark Thornton, it is great to have you back on Commodity Culture. Now, war is raging in the Middle East, and both gold and silver have largely been selling off. It seems like whenever the president tweets about potential peace, the metals rise, and when it looks like we're in for a longer conflict, they drop again. This is contrary to what a lot of people expected. Why do you think the metals have responded the way they have so far? And how do you expect them to react should this war continue to drag on?
Jesse, it's great to be here. In 2026, we've got two main big things going on. One is the business cycle, and the other is the war. And the war is a supply shock, okay? You're taking people out of the labor force, you're taking materials, you're shutting down transportation, you're doing all sorts of negative things, particularly to oil, which is a master ingredient in production. And so when you do that at a point in time, that supply shock is going to show up in the consumer price index because of oil prices, natural gas, fertilizer, and so forth. And it's going to spike CPI. So it's not monetary inflation, it's just the statistical price inflation that jumps. But that's the statistic that the Federal Reserve uses to gauge or to justify, really, its monetary policy, and in particular, rate cuts. So it makes kind of sense that, higher oil prices, because of the war and because of the danger and because of the supply shock, is going to feed into higher PPI and CPI statistics and make it more difficult for the Fed to justify rate cuts. And so we've seen, the expectations this year where the Fed was going to cut rates 2 or 3 or more times, and now there's fewer expectations for cuts. And that's true around the world. And of course, gold and silver are global markets. And so that's why, we think of war as dangerous and I want gold. But the people who are really moving outside of the speculators and the traders and the hedge funds who took profits and moved into oil before the war, because of the war, we see Persian Gulf countries. I'm sure there's a lot of people there who are selling their gold and trying to get out, trying to leave. I mean, people are trying to leave that area. They're trying to continue to finance their businesses without any revenues. And so in that small corner of the market, people are selling. And so there are, you can't think of your own view of gold and silver all the time. It's not going to hold true because other people are in other circumstances. And there's a lot of people that have wanted to get out in February because of, various expectations, liquidity, and now the war and the expectations of fewer rate cuts, which are good for gold and silver prices.
Well, I want to touch on both silver and gold specifically now, and starting with silver because it's been on a roller coaster over the past several months as it surged close to $120 earlier in the year. It has fallen now to around $73 at this point in time. What do you make of this wild price action? Do you think we ultimately get back to new all-time highs, maybe even this year?
Well, of course, silver is more volatile than gold. And once, gold and silver went up, especially silver went up to new all time highs. And once it got over $100, I began to expect a big correction in the market, maybe as much as 40%. And it's gone even lower than that, starting from 121. But, you know, 20% for gold, 40% for silver, those are just average correction markers based on historical averages. If you go back, I mean, they're never exactly 20% or exactly 40% or 10%. It's always, just around that general area. And so this has been a big correction. And a lot of that has to do with some of those basic factors that I talked about: speculators, traders, hedge funds, and so forth, along with the concerns about the business cycle, the finance industry, banks, private credit, private equity, all of those people looking for liquidity and safety by selling assets and going into the US dollar. But then, of course, there's the war on top of that. And so we've had a double whammy, and things going in the opposite direction depending upon the news, depending upon what President Trump says. And if it's, if it's sort of a pro-war day where everything is going to be blown up, then you get one strong reaction. And if it's peace around the corner, the straits are going to be opened, then you get the completely opposite reaction. And so we've not only had a big correction in percentage terms, but we've had a lot of volatility, in the meantime.
And I got to put you on the spot. Triple digit silver in 2026, or do you think we're going to have to wait longer than that?
Yes, I would say triple digit silver in 2026. I would say new all time high in 2026. Obviously that's a guesstimate, but if we clear up this situation in the Persian Gulf and we reset ourselves on long term trends where the precious metals ship is being driven primarily, its engine or its sales are driven primarily from monetary expansion and dollar degrading, then I expect, much higher prices. When we talk about tailwinds in precious metals, we look at things like the value of the dollar, we look at interest rates, we look at oil prices. And higher interest rates, higher dollar, and higher oil, which is what we've gotten, are tailwinds working against the precious metals. And of course, over the long haul, those things, you can have rising precious metals in a rising interest rate environment. Over the trend, you can have gold prices going up and the value of the dollar being stable, not going down. The tailwinds or the headwinds are like minor steering currents, but all three of those have been working against the precious metals markets over the last month or two.
Gold also selling off, as we've touched on, although it's been far less volatile than silver, considering the price inflation we could see as a result of this war. Now, I don't know if you technically want to call that inflation per se, but nonetheless, rising prices due to, of course, the increased price of the main input, which is energy, oil, as well as natural gas. The Fed is holding rates steady, as we discussed, potentially raising them up ahead. I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you think that's in the cards. Are these all headwinds for gold in addition to what you've discussed so far? And would you look at any corrections in the gold market as a potential buying opportunity at this point?
Well, I think that, the expectations of Fed cuts this year have been greatly diminished. And I think rate cuts in other central banks around the world have been greatly diminished. And we've even heard increasing talk about increases in those government rates. And so that is a headwind. And those headwinds do matter in the short term, less so in the long term. And so that's definitely working against it. Higher oil prices are definitely working against it. This war has been very disruptive to the market process that was going on, where we were seeing higher precious metal prices. We were already seeing higher commodity prices before the start of the war. Oil prices were already working themselves up. And so and I pray that the situation in the Persian Gulf is resolved while we're speaking here today. I mean, I hope it goes away immediately. The quicker, the better. The sooner, the better for everybody in the world economy. But once that happens, then we get reset back onto the problem of the structure of the U.S. economy when looked at in terms of the Austrian business cycle theory. We see a lot of male investments. We see a lot of overextension of credit in technology and artificial intelligence, data centers, private equity, private credit, just a whole bunch of places where there is imbalances, where investments have been made and they're not really paying off. And that signals that later in the year, we're going to have a stock market crisis. And, the Fed already started a semi-secret quantitative easing program back in December, $40 billion a month. I expect that to be expanded, because they're not going to want to lower the interest rate, but quantitative easing, yield curve controls, and things like that are other ways in which they can increase the money supply, increase credit and liquidity without actually, targeting that policy rate. And once we get back to that normal track, then I expect, the metal prices to firm and head higher, along those long-run policy trends of course, it's starting with government spending, the national debt, the interest payments as part of the budget, and then all of the money that the Fed has to create to make sure that goes smoother. And so even with the war out of the way, we still have this humongous problem, this financial problem, this fiscal problem with our government at its heart.
The sponsor of today's episode is ARC Silver Gold Osmium. Owner Ian Everard is praised even by his competitors as one of the most honest and level-headed bullion dealers in the United States. They have some great prices. You can see some of them displayed right now on screen. Take advantage of these specials today by reaching out to Ian at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. Make sure to tell him, of course, that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. And of course, the war is adding fuel to that fire, with estimates of around $900 million per day that this war is costing the U.S. The administration recently requesting $1.5 trillion for the military in a Congress budget request. I mean, we're at the level of debt now where it's $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Who really cares? But at what point does this become unsustainable in your view?
It's already been unsustainable. I mean, I don't see any realistic possibility that, the American government is going to get its fiscal situation in any kind of balance, or, what's really needed is massive spending cuts, elimination of programs. It would really require a very concerted effort just to try to get a hold of this beast. And under those, conditions, it's hard to, politicians, that's all they want to do, especially when it's a fiat monetary system and they don't have to increase taxes in order to increase spending. All they want to do is spend, spend, spend. And, they're getting their money and their votes through special interest groups. They're not really paying attention to the average American. And And so, it's not surprising that, President Trump, there's nothing to play with out there, and you need a justification like going to war and preventing nuclear bombs and invading various countries. And so he's taking this tact of emergency military money and reestablishing colonies in Venezuela and South America, Cuba, Greenland, etc. Even though we know for 1,000 years of experience or more that colonies are just a bad economic deal and they drag down the home country. I mean, Adam Smith, one of his main points in The Wealth of Nations, which is now 250 years old, one of his main points is that colonies were a bad economic deal, and that the Dutch, who were much smarter, knew that all along, and they had a very limited colonial system, and yet they became much wealthier than the English. And they had a very stable government, and they weren't involved in as many wars, and they lost fewer people to military death. And they weren't involved in all sorts of, uprisings and revolutions, and nearly as much as the British. So, we've always known that colonial empires are a bad economic deal for the homeland, but President Trump doesn't have any other way to go except making up some ad hoc emergency in some faraway country, as well as, Cuba and Venezuela and Greenland, things like that.
Yeah, I'm wondering your thoughts as to whether this is kind of the US trying to hold on to its hegemony, because obviously there's so many theories floating around out there in terms of why this conflict is occurring, from, Brian Berletich, who gives an interesting point of view that it's actually the US is the one controlling Israel, not the other way around. And in fact, it's propaganda, the spreading of the information that Israel is controlling the US. And there's some policy papers going back to the early 2000s that discuss how they're going to use Israel as a scapegoat in an eventual attack on Iran. And then, of course, you have those of the mind that, well, Israel's calling the shots. Those talking about this is a religious war, it's a holy war. And then, of course, the concept of the US kind of cutting China off of cheap energy, which they were paying for in yuan and continue to do so in yuan from Iran, a threat to the petrodollar system, which perhaps the US sees as existential. Why do you think this conflict is happening, and how do you see it playing out? I know you said you hope that it stops as we're speaking here today. I personally don't see that happening. I see no other end to this than perhaps one that is potentially catastrophic. But a lot of questions there I know I'm throwing at you, but would just love your overall thoughts on the situation.
Well, it's hard to figure. It's hard to believe that Netanyahu is controlled by anybody. But, if I was cynical about President Trump, who seems to have semi-dictatorial powers right now, I would look at his friends and his enemies. And, he's against the BRICS and China and India and South Africa and other countries. They need oil and natural gas, and they are going to be greatly hurt as a result of this, because they're the main importers of Persian Gulf oil and natural gas, liquefied natural gas, and so forth. So he's getting, from the cynical point of view, he's getting at his enemies. And of course, again, being the cynical take on this, you could say, well, President Trump has all these friends and contributors in the oil and natural gas industry in the United States who are going to benefit. President Trump has a lot of supporters and voters in the farming community who have very low prices and tons of inventory of grain products sitting around not being sold, and they will benefit from this war. And our fertilizer producers, of course, in the U.S. and Canada. And, so you could take this cynical point of view, and of course also, President Trump has a lot of supporters in real estate and banking, and convention cities like Las Vegas and New York City, and the Persian Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates and Dubai, have become a new competitor for corporate headquarters, business development, travel through on the airlines, leisure and tourism, and so on and so forth. They become a new competitor for the same industries in the United States, which just happen to support President Trump and donate a lot of money to his campaigns. So, if you look at his friends and enemies, he could be just, getting at his enemies and paying off his friends. If you want to take a totally cynical, non-analytic view of, what person controls what other person, then the cynical view or the skeptic view of politics and President Trump's actions makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great analysis. Now, we've been speaking a lot on this show, and I spoke about it with you last time you were on as well, about the fiat currency system and the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. When it comes to this topic, there's those who believe we're nearing the end game of this Ponzi scheme experiment that's been happening since, at least 1971. Uh, and then there are those who say, you know what, this can get kicked down the road for much longer than people realize. They point to the euro dollar, the fact that there's so many US dollars out there that are being transacted between different countries, a lot of foreign countries that even denote their debt, their bonds in US dollar currency, and that whole euro dollar market isn't really taken into account to consider just how strong the US dollar is internationally. I wonder what your thoughts are on the status of the US dollar as the reserve currency. And if it were to go away, what would that world look like in terms of the reserve currency? Would we be looking at a perhaps countervailing BRICS system? Would we be looking at the yuan? How do you see all that potentially playing out?
Well, I see the US dollar is in a lot of trouble. And I've been writing about or speaking about hyperinflation for some time now because, you can see it forming. And then all of a sudden it's here and it's upon us, and nobody knows where it came from, and everybody's totally surprised by it. But, if you go back a few years, the dollar is almost as good as gold. We're the world reserve currency of all central banks, dominating, and we're the dominant currency in all international trade. And countries from around the world, in Europe, in South America, and other places are, in fact, using the US dollar as their currency, or they have a euro dollar system. They're investing tons of money in the United States, and so they have dollar denominated assets. In 2011, Professor Eichengreen wrote a book about the dollar and its status, and he said, well, it's going to last forever because there's no alternative. And I said, BS. There will be alternatives. And of course, since that time, we've had Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We've had the BRICS system, which everybody poo-pooed as being impossible or illogical. But look at it. It's starting. It's working. They're adding a gold component, gold exchange component for trading gold, trading gold, trading commodities and trading goods overseas. People are making international trades between two currencies without using the dollar. And now, in the Persian Gulf, it's obvious to me that the petrodollar thing is flying out the window pretty quickly. The petrodollar meant that all oil and natural gas was being traded between all countries in terms of U.S. dollars, and that absorbed a lot of dollars in terms of being used and exchanged, elevating the value of the U.S. dollar. And now, of course, people are buying uh, oil with Russian rubles and Chinese yuan, and in the Persian Gulf and elsewhere. And so this event is adding significantly to the demise of the petrodollar. And so, I've a long time ago I spoke about, we're heading down in the lane that merges onto the highway to hyperinflation is dead ahead. And then more recently, I said we're merging onto the on ramp to the highway to hyperinflation. And I think right now, literally in the last few days, with this where the trade in oil in the Persian Gulf has been upended, tells me that we're on that on ramp firmly, and we're accelerating, and we're getting ready to go onto the highway to hyperinflation. So it's a long, deliberate process. And people think that it depends solely on the supply of dollars, but it depends on the demand for dollars as much or more. Are people willing to hold U.S. dollars? Are people wanting to use U.S. dollars in exchange? And I have a feeling that the loss of the petrodollar, the rise of the BRICS, and a whole host of other things, including the potential dumping of assets, dollar-denominated assets from Europe and elsewhere, the repatriation of U.S. dollar cash from the third world and from black market participants, drug dealers, and so forth, who no longer want to hold dollars. They want to hold gold and Bitcoin and things like that. This money is these dollars are going to flow, and it's going to cause price inflation, and everybody is going to want to hold fewer dollars. Their demand for dollars is going to decline, and with it, the value of the dollar. So Mises laid this all out based on the Weimar hyperinflation, where people might absorb more and more supplies of a money, and then when they realize the price is going up, they're less likely to hold as many currency units. And eventually, once they learn the lesson, they want to dump those currency units as quickly as possible. And it's that demand, that change in the demand for money, that really fires up the hyperinflation.
Well, how can those listening protect themselves from this scenario you just laid out there? Is it really about having physical gold and silver in your possession first and foremost? Do you have concerns that if we do enter an era of hyperinflation for the dollar, that we could see mass civil unrest, potential violence and crime breaking out more than it already is? Should people be looking at, potentially another jurisdiction to get a residence permit in, potentially stocking up on food and clean water and making sure they have their own electricity supply? Do you think things will get that dire? How do you yourself consider that scenario when it comes to preparing for it?
I would say yes, 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 and yes. But it's hard to put a timeline on that. But if we continue down this road of, socialism in government, runaway socialist policies, you see disrespect and a downgrading respect for property rights and for the taxpayer and for businesses. All of that, is ultimately going to pan out. And of course, Americans are completely divided politically, left and right. And we've seen violence and people rising up against the government. And some of that's a good thing, obviously. I mean, we do need to be demonstrating in favor of these things, of property rights and free markets. But that's not really happening very much. So, yes, I mean, precious metals, I certainly wouldn't hold it all. Personally, I would diversify the locations of where my precious metals were. And, and private security is an issue. And of course, you should always have a backup in terms of food and water. And in a hyperinflation or just a high rate of inflation, it's a good idea. I mean, if you buy, say, canned goods and paper goods and you stack them and then you use them, uh, and you're rotating through all of those things, it means that the canned goods and paper goods that you're using today, you bought at a much lower price in the past. And you've protected yourself against inflation the same way you intend when you buy precious metals. So yes, I mean stacking all of that stuff is, as long as you're using it and becoming familiar with it, um, then that's a great way of preparing and getting mentally prepared. I mean, you don't want to go into any crisis, whether it's a hyperinflation or a hurricane or a tornado or whatever it is. You don't want to have to, start by, trying to create some strange food product that you've never had before, or, set up some water system at the last minute. I mean, you want to be familiarized with this because based on my reading, not my experience, but any kind of emergency, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and so forth, mentally very disturbing. So the more you can prepare and actually do it, then mentally you'll be much less anxious and better prepared to deal with these things. And you should be prepared to deal with emergencies, even in a totally free market, great economy. If everything's great, you should still have a little Boy Scout in you and be prepared. And a lot of that is, having access to things and being familiar with them, using them, and so forth. So, yeah, I would be looking to have some knowledge and have some access to alternative systems for all of the necessities of life.
Yeah, some great words of wisdom there. Do you think that those pulling the levers of power ultimately are aware that this system is in a very precarious place? Because we're obviously seeing quite an increase in many countries, so-called, former legacy brand Western nations like the UK, Germany, France, Canada, America, etc. We're seeing somewhat of a crackdown on free speech, a crackdown on personal freedoms. In Germany now, if you're a military age male, you have to supposedly get permission from the government to leave abroad longer than 3 months in case they need you for the military. I want to read something. I hate to quote the BBC, but I'm about to. So here we go. German males aged between 17 and 45 may need to seek approval for lengthy stays abroad under changes introduced as part of a new law which introduced voluntary military service. Well, the plan is for voluntary service if the security situation worsens or if too few volunteers came forward. A form of compulsory military service could be considered. Now, interestingly, what is not making any headlines in the West, but I'm aware of because I'm right beside this country, is Croatia actually recently introduced compulsory military service in January of this year once again. Now, for now, you're also allowed to opt for office work or picking up garbage on the street, essentially free labor for the government. But that could very easily turn into a full-on military situation where you just must report to the military. Um, Poland's talked about doing this. I mean, it seems to be kind of a dangerous trend, but just this overall restriction of freedoms, this overall government overreach that seems to be on the rise. Is this related to the fact that these politicians know that the system is kind of on its last legs, so to speak, and they're trying to clamp down as much as they can on the citizenry before it happens?
Well, I think the political elites know that the system is cracking, it's breaking. The big bankers and the financiers, the big industrialists, the war industry people, the leaders of the political parties, they all know what's going on. This is basically the Epstein class, which is global and makes up people from all of those subgroups. And now they're stooges that are at the actual politicians running things, frankly, they don't seem to know what's going on at all. The people in charge of places like Germany and the UK and Canada, and I don't know, they really don't seem to know what's going on. Um, some of them, and so I would be very suspicious, as I am of all politicians. But yeah, I mean, all these countries are socialist. They're progressive, democratic, socialist, fascist, and they don't have any respect for human rights or human beings in many cases. They don't care about your rights or your life or your property, and so when politicians exhibit those traits, and they don't do anything to stop the breakdown of the fabric of society. They allow criminals and welfare bums to run riot all over the place. You got to think about jumping ship and trying to find an alternative country, but there's not many that I can even think of. I mean, I'm not leaving. I'm committed to stay in this fight, but and I can't really think of too many places that are too much better, because socialism really, people think of the world economy as free market and liberal and capitalist and all that, but that's not it at all. I mean, we have a socialist system that's become much more socialist. And you can see that in trade, especially. If you don't have a gold standard, you have protectionism and you have trading blocks and you have, more and more nonsense over time. And ultimately, it does lead to war. And I think we are, in, kind of in a festering world war right now, with many countries involved and many countries you know uh, in participation in some way. I mean, China, Russia, the United States, Europe, and so forth. It's largely economic and diplomatic at this point, trade barriers and so forth. But that's always a prelude to war, is these, where you're trying to beggar thy neighbor with inflation and you're trying to disadvantage them with protectionism, and you're cutting off people's access to your raw materials or your strategic goods. And that's what we've been doing. So I'm very, very concerned up and down the scale. And I don't see it, many countries or many political systems which rank very high or superior to a lot of these countries.
Yeah, some great points. What ultimately is the solution to all of this from a governmental standpoint, in your opinion? Because I had Michael Oliver on the show recently. He wrote a book called The New Libertarianism, Anarcho-Capitalism. I was based on a thesis he wrote for his master's in the 1970s. He got some input from Murray Rothbard in writing that book as well. And his concept is that government itself needs to go away, just no government whatsoever, everything being a free market system, including security, the police force, the judicial system, etc. Do you think that's a potential solution at some point? It feels like we're so far away from anything like that ever happening. Are you more of the mind of Ayn Rand, who believed in a small government? What's the ultimate solution to get? Because it seems like the corruption is just so brazen and in your face now that this system cannot stand the way that it currently is.
No, it can't stand forever. It's heading down a path of self destruction. I think Michael is 100% correct. I back up that his thesis in that book, completely. And we don't need government for anything. I myself can live basically, 99% of my life without any uh, government interaction whatsoever. I mean, my insurance companies are much more important to protecting me than the government itself. The government is just extracting money and resources from me on a regular basis, and they're preventing me from, increasing my wealth or increasing employment or whatever I want to do. They're just putting roadblocks in the way to economic progress for me and everybody else, really. Now, of course, how do you get from a runaway fascist economic government writ large in the United States and elsewhere around the world back to even a small limited government? If we got back to a small limited government like under the Articles of Confederation after we pulverized the uh, Great Britain, threw them off of the continent. If we had government that size, well, I wouldn't even be doing this job, and you probably wouldn't even have this podcast. And so I'm not sure if we'll ever get back to no government. And there's lots of ways that we can reduce the government. We could, if you put me in charge of the budget, I could bring the budget under control, stabilizing the welfare programs, and restoring a gold standard, a commodity money system. You have to start with a commodity money system and then deal with all of the problems as they come about based on real money. If you don't start there, then you're just patching one thing with the other, and you never get anywhere. Kind of like Doge, it never seemed to get anywhere, and it didn't. So you have to start with hard money. So you have to make the hard choices after that. And everybody who works for the government, everybody who's getting a check for the government, and everybody who's getting, special favors and protectionism from the government, they're going to have to lose in the short run. But ultimately, that there's an enormous payoff in a free market society with a free market system. And the glory of our current standard of living is testament to that. That the U.S. rose from a natural resource wasteland, basically, with no economic development whatsoever. We defeated the world's economic, military, and economic superpower, and then we became the greatest nation on earth with almost no government between 1776 and, say, the Spanish-American War. We had almost no government whatsoever, and yet we became the world's economic superpower.
Well, Dr. Thornton, this has been a fantastic conversation. Could you tell people about the work you do at the Mises Institute, where people can go to learn more about it, your podcast there, and anywhere else you'd like to direct people online?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit educational institution. We promote the economic writings of Ludwig von Mises, the Austrian School of Economics, to students and graduate students, professors, and the general public. We have one of the world's largest economic web pages in the world, and it's free to everybody with no registration. We have many daily articles coming out on topical things of interest. We have newsletters. We publish books. We have events both here in Auburn, Alabama, and around the country, and even a few around the world. And we have several different podcasts, including my own Minor Issues podcast, which is an 8 to 10 minute economic analysis once a week. But we have several podcasts, and we have just a huge library of audio and video lectures and events that can be downloaded. And usually there are no ads or registration or anything like that. And you can really look up any topic that you're interested in, and we'll have something to say about that. We're here to teach people how markets work. Why do markets work? And why does government always fail? And why and how governments always fail? Why do the worst get to the top in the political system? So we teach the mechanics of all that, not just, oh, I'm for the free market or, oh, I'm against the government. We're here to teach people how these things work and, to create, to build citizens who have that intellectual capacity to defend free markets and the free society and to stand up against this immense tide of socialist thinking, where all the textbooks and all of the teachers in our public and private schools and all of the universities come from a socialist mindset. And even in the, homeschooling, we find textbooks and teachers who really don't understand the free market, private property nature of the American success story. And so we've got a lot of material, and it's all for free. And I encourage everybody to come and get a piece of it. And also, right now we have a free book giveaway. It's a small book of F.A. Hayek's greatest hits articles. He was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. He was Mises's one of his most important graduate students. And this is his greatest hits articles. So you can use the link and get a free copy sent out to you, or many copies if you want.
Great. Well, I'll put that link in the description below, as well as the link to the General Mises website and your podcast, so people can check all of that out. Dr. Thornton, thank you so much once again. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Jesse. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today. Our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium, has some great specials on precious metals, bullion products. You can see them on your screen right now. These are subject to change and well supplies last. So make sure to reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And of course, pick up your Stack Silver, not Fiat t-shirt in the Commodity Culture shop, backed by a 100% quality guarantee. Use the link in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.